Hello, everyone. This is Seth with the World of Paleoanthropology, and I know it's been a little while, but today we are here with another episode of The Story of Us, and I am here joined by the wonderful Dr. George Nash, who is a paleo art researcher, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself before we get on to some of the amazing work that he has done concerning not just art, but architecture and things of that matter. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, sir?
Well, where does it all begin? I've been sort of working in archaeology for the last 40 odd years, and I started off at the University of Wales, St David's University College, which was I think the third oldest university in England and Wales. So it's got a bit of a pedigree, a bit of a history. And I joined the archaeology department as an undergraduate back in the 1980s. And I went there as a medieval scholar. I was really interested in Anglo-Saxon, but it really didn't sort of light my fire when I got there. And then became very interested in social theory. And some of you who are of my age will remember the Shanks and Tilly uh, work, and Ian Hodder, of course, who's now at Stanford. I followed their idea of what archaeology was about. So I came from very much from a philosophical background, and I still hold a lot of that in my arsenal, basically, when I'm doing my work. So I did my undergraduate there. Then did a master's there, and then ran out of money, as as most postgrads do. I think you know what I'm talking about. And luckily for me, I had a phone call from a very dear friend of mine in Norway. Said, "Come and do your PhD over here." So I finished my PhD, which was in rock art. It was I was looking at the rock art of Norway and Spain, and just seeing if there was again looking at the social, political, economic aspects of archaeology to see if there was a connection between two different hunter-gatherer societies,
Mhm.
to do a
Right.
comparative analysis between the two. And there was. So, but I decided to sort of stick with Norwegian rock art for quite some time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I must like the cold for some strange reason. And then from there, I've just been on a whirlwind of fantastic sort of experiences. And it's sort of I'm really at the wrong stage of my life. I wish I was 30 years younger, because the things I'm doing now is what somebody of 30, 35 should be doing, not my age. And that's what I find frustrating, because I thoroughly enjoy what I do. I managed to squeeze into some very awkward caves. I don't know how I do it, but I do it. I think I'm spurred on by my younger uh, comrades and teammates who I work with a lot in Spain and Portugal. But I've just come back from an expedition working in Spain, doing some really interesting stuff. In fact, doing some sampling. So I've sort of touched into the hard science world now. So I've had a lot to catch up with, and I've been looking at we've been looking at cave sites that deal with not just early modern human, but also potentially Neanderthal as well. And believe it or not, you better hold on to this, Seth, but we do have um, painted rock art in the UK now, in the British Isles. We have engraved rock art. We have about three or four sites. And of those three or four sites, I'm responsible for the discovery of two of them, actually, maybe three of
Wow.
them, in fact.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you about those in a minute. But
Can't wait to hear about them.
my big piece de resistance is the recent discovery on a cave in a cave site in South Wales. I can't disclose where it is at the moment, because
Of
the
course, of
last cave
course.
the last cave site I exposed on the media, it got vandalized within 2 months. It's just madness, and I can't work it out why people do this sort of thing. But so I'm sort of very very nervous about sort of saying where it is.
Absolutely.
But I can
Right.
certainly give you a description of what it is and the interesting story behind it. So that's where I am at the moment. I'm busy writing. I've just finished a couple of books and writing another book at the moment, uh, to do with the dreaded Neolithic, and also doing something with Paleolithic as well. But I still, again, have an active writing career, an active archaeological career. I still like that, handling human remains, and I still do a lot of that. I'm going to be working in early January on a couple of sites with human remains. And then we get back to South Africa, which I'm happy to talk about, which has been remarkable sort of experience working in Rising Star with Lee Berger's team.
I
So that's
know
where I am.
a lot of our viewers are going to definitely want to hear about that. So we'll definitely touch on South
I bet they
Africa.
do.
Of course, everyone wants to hear about Rising Star, and I know I'm already going to tell you guys now. We're not going to be, saying too much probably about what's going on, I assume, but we'll talk about it. But before that, I want to hear about kind of. So first of all, you mentioned that there was a connection between the hunter-gatherer rock art you saw in Norway and what you saw in, was it France, you said, or Spain?
Levantine Spain. Yeah.
Spain. Okay. First of all, what was that connection? And can you extrapolate that to assume that all hunter-gatherers, or many of them at least, would have had those similar connections?
Yeah, it's quite simple in many respects. I mean, the two rock art assemblages. One is engraved in Norway, and it's all very close to the fjords and the open sea, and that's reflected in their actual rock art. I mean, some remarkable sites there which have life-size whales engraved on the panels. Uh, Reindeer, elk, seal, fox, bear, a few human figures, not very many human figures in boats, but it's very much an animal-dominated assemblage. And then we go to Levantine Spain, where it's all painted, nearly all painted, and the paintings comprise of, guess what? Animals, usually large bulls, chamois, type of wild ibex or goat. We have horse, all the animals you'd expect to find when you're looking outside a rock shelter or a cave in their respective areas.
Right.
But all seem to be sort of laid out in the same sort of way, same sort of fashion in terms of their sort of um, um, their panel design and their panel layout. The more elaborate ones, I will say, are um, the Spanish assemblage, only because the artist there has learned how to do to hues and also to overpaint as well. So there's one particular site I was dealing with as a case study for my doctorate, and that had 17 layers of paint. So quite
Wow.
clearly, artists were going back there again and again and again, 17 times at least, and overpainting. And what was really interesting was that the dominant colors for some of these original animals was white. So they were making a white pigment, applying it to the wall, creating that lovely bull, for example, and then at some point, the whiteness of the animal fades or it goes out of fashion, and then they start to reapply new paint, but it's orange or red or brown paint made from local hematite. And even more weird than that is that as time moves on with some sites in the Spanish Levant, you get bulls, which then become uh, um, red deer. So the artist applied antlers to the head areas of the animal. So quite clearly, there's a change in ideology where bulls were once in and now they're out and now
Mhm.
being replaced with red deer. So that's the Spanish stuff. Now the Norwegian stuff is very different because there's no superimposition or very little superimposition. And if there is superimposition there, it's done there deliberately as one event. So the artist is coming along, but painting exquisitely. I can't say the word. Painting beautifully. Painting, engraving beautifully. Such as elk and reindeer, and but more importantly, they're superimposing other animals, and it appears to be one event. So two different sort of two hunter gatherer economies going on
Mhm.
with two slightly different ideas in art, but probably looking at the animal in the same way. And I applied things like totemism, for example, and I also applied my big hero Claude Lévi-Strauss, and I applied a structural analysis, so looking at sort of oppositions and relationships between certain animals on the panel. So it was a great fun thing to do because it was in many respects complex because I was dealing with about 3 or 4 thousand images
Mhm.
from both traditions. But it was great playing around with the statistics of each site. I looked at about 60 sites on each for each for each tradition. And again, what was telling me when I put all the number crunching together, I started to work out well there are patterns emerging in terms of panel layout, ideology, and what they were looking at, why they were looking at it in a particular way. And of course, typical of my research then was to apply anthropology and ethnography to try and understand better what might be going on, because I have this strange sort of view that whatever's going on in the modern world in terms of non-corrupted ethnography and obviously corrupted anthropology now uh, could be applied to what was going on 8, 10,000 years ago. And you could
Mhm.
argue that for maybe going back 20, 30,000 years ago, which I didn't look at. Of course, I was mainly concentrating on Mesolithic hunter-gatherer rock art for my PhD.
Absolutely. And so, first of all, were any of these sites? I love that you worked in Norwegian rock art because I actually have some. I don't recall now that the moment is upon me if they're Swedish or Norwegian, but I have some tattoos of engravings. Like one is the ship with
Ah, yes.
yeah.
You don't
So
need to show me. You don't need to show me because I know what you're talking about.
yeah, I know. And sure you
Yeah,
do. I
yeah.
have a ship, and a few things like that. That's generally a theme of my tattoos is rock art. So
Mm, yeah.
big shocker to anyone there.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about caving, what you're working on now that you're squeezing through these small caves and everything, and what are we talking about there before we get to what
Rising
everyone
star.
knows is Rising Star? What other caves are you working on?
Well, I mean, it all kicked off. It kicked off. I taught at Bristol University for 19 years, and I was teaching there, luckily for me, early prehistory and anthropology. And I thoroughly enjoyed what I was doing. And one of my sort of things was to students was to take them out on field trips. And where I was teaching in Bristol, I would take them to a place called the Gower Peninsula, which is in Wales, South Wales, and it's around about sort of 70, 80 kilometres to the west of Bristol. So we get in a mini bus, go over to the pub, of course, on one of the pubs around Gower Coast, have a few beers. I hasten to add, I wasn't driving, and then we would go looking at a couple of absolute classic cave sites, which were easy to access because of health and safety, and that's where it all kicked off. Kicked off around about 2006, 2007, and every year we go to the same cave sites. Anyway, in 2010, um, we got to this site called Cathole Cave, remarkable cave, and it's sort of in the middle of a dry valley, limestone area, of course. That's where all our best caves are. And Cathole Cave is one of 95 caves on the Gower coast that have some form of archaeology. They could have Bronze Age, Neolithic, Mesolithic, and sometimes Paleolithic. Certainly, usually as artifacts. As at that time there was no rock art of Paleolithic age in any of the caves on the Gower coast. And again, just to put it into context, the big thing was for us in the UK, the British Isles, was that a team, an Anglo-Spanish team, had made discoveries at an area called Creswell Crags up in the Nottinghamshire Derbyshire border, and they discovered 17 figures within, I think, 2 caves, but mainly a place called Churchill Cave, which I'm actually doing work on at the moment, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. And what happened there? They're all engravings, and they made the announcement in 2003 and had a date of around about 13,100, 200 or thereabouts. It was dated by Alistair Pike from Southampton University, who's a very, very good uranium series specialist. And he was lucky that he had stalagmite or stal flow over a couple of the images, so he managed to put to date them. And then then a sort of a 6 year lapse, and then I accidentally found, again, just by luck, at the back of Cat Hole Cave. So we took the students in. I went blah blah blah. Here we have our cave. This is what they found. And in 1870, it was excavated by a guy called Colonel Wood, who hoiked everything out. And I think you know what I'm talking about, when he just took everything out of the cave. He wasn't really interested in the minutiae of the stratigraphy or anything like that. He just went out.
Right.
He's looking for big, megafauna remains, megafaunal remains, a bit of flint, and it's all in our house in the National Museum of in Cardiff. And then in 1959, there's a guy called Charles McBurney, and Charles McBurney was from Cambridge University, and he excavated Le Cots and Brelard, was where Prince Charles did his training as an archaeologist when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge. And McBurney excavated 4 or 5 caves in Wales, and one of them was Cathol. And he did his excavations outside the now entrance of the cave. And again, this is one thing that I think a lot of people tend to forget is limestone is very soluble, and the current entrance of the cave to the rock art is 11 meters. But in Paleolithic times, maybe 15, 20,000 years ago, the cave entrance would have been much further forward, maybe up to 10 meters forward. And so where McBurney was excavating outside is actually inside the original cave area, which was, surprise, surprise, he found quite a lot of flint there, including 3 Font Roboy flint pieces, arrowheads, which can be quite accurately dated to around about 26 to 28,000 KYR. And from that, you get an idea that it's not just the potential of finding a sort of a late glacial deposition within the cave, but it goes back much, much further to a point that it ran between 26 and 28,000 in the British Isles and certainly northwestern Europe. It's damn cold. You know, if you look at the paleo environment record there, we're looking at temperatures of -10 in the summer. So it's a chilly place to be. And so this is right on the Gower coast. And again, for people who are listening to this, to put you in the picture, the Gower coast overlooks the Bristol Channel, and the Bristol Channel is now quite a major waterway or water expanse which flows into the Atlantic Ocean. But 15, 20,000 years ago, it was a plateau, a very, very lush plateau where you had migratory mammoth, elk, reindeer, horse, bison. You had all the small mammals such as Arctic lemming, voles, also inhabiting the caves as well. And a lot of these remains, some of the best remains or best faunal remains from the whole of the British Isles, comes from Cat Hole Cave. And it was looked at by a woman called Dorothy Garrod, again, another one of my heroes, who did a big analysis on the Paleolithic and wrote a fantastic book in 1926. And she records in detail some of the faunal remains that Colonel Woods found in these 1870 excavations. Again, he was only looking for goodies, but she put all the stuff together and did a really nice synthesis of the paleo-environmental record of that particular cave. Anyway, back to where I was in 2010. I take the students up into the cave, and then we have about 10 minutes to spare before you go back to the pub for our Sunday sort of tea lunch. And I just said, right, you get back to the cave. We're just going to have a quick look around. So a couple of students stayed around with me, put the light around the back of the cave, and lo and behold, staring me in the face was an engraved reindeer, stylized, not too stylized, but it was stylized enough for me to work out it was, first of all, a cervid, and more than likely, because of its sweeping antlers behind its head, it was a reindeer. And luckily for me, I had a style flow flowing over the head area of the engraving, and I managed to get a date using Peter von Kallstrom and Louise Thomas from the Open University. They came and did the uranium thorium dating for this, and we had a date of, well, we had 2 dates, but the best date was, obviously, I would say this, wouldn't I, 14,500, which then put it the earliest rock art we had in the British Isles.
Wow.
And really, that's where it all kicked off. My interest in, I sort of had to put down all my books on the Neolithic and the Mesolithic and start thinking in the way of Paleolithic studies and research. But bearing in mind, I leave all the scientific Paleolithic stratigraphy, excavations to the experts. I just do the art. And if I find the art, I can say something quite meaningful
Mhm.
about it. So it started off there. And then I started to look at some of the other caves within the Gower Peninsula. And lo and behold, I found more rock art, which is waiting to be looked at by the team I work with, which is the First Art team. And I'll come to those people in a minute. And also in the Wye Valley. And again, if any of your viewers know about the Paleolithic sequences in the British Isles, most of it obviously is obviously south of the Devonian ice sheet line. So around about 15, 20,000 before present, you have this wiggly line coming from the North Sea up in Lincolnshire and coming down and wiggling its way around the Midlands, coming through past Bristol, and then skirting and or cutting right across South Wales, leaving the Gower coast and most of southern Britain ice free, but cold and permafrost. So there's three areas at the moment which are of interest to me. Well, four areas in fact. The Gower coast, where I found stuff. The Mendip Hills, which is just south of Bristol. The Wye Valley, which is on the Welsh English border, just south of Hereford. And then we have Creswell Crags, which has been looked at by the Anglo Spanish team where they found rock art. So those are the four areas where early prehistoric rock art is coming up. Nothing like what's going on in Rising Star or Spain or Portugal or France or even now Italy, in fact. But nonetheless, it's starting to put the British Isles on the Paleolithic rock art map, which is again, if you go back to Leroy Grand's book of 1965, the Paleolithic art of Western Europe, there's nothing mentioned there at all about the British Isles.
Right.
So it's getting really, really quite interesting now. We're starting to pick up interesting stuff. So quite clearly, we've got what I would call a different kind of Paleolithic, and it's a northern frontier Paleolithic. What I mean by northern frontier, it's the northern frontier where the ice meets humanity, I dare say. We don't see any
Right.
humanity going over the ice or under the ice. They're going to that ice line, doing what they have to do. And this is what we're seeing at Catol. We're also seeing it at Pavlin Cave as well, which you probably know about, which is where the famous Red Lady of Pavlin comes from. And that, in many respects, that what inspired me to come and look in that particular area because of the very early sequences we had at Pavlin. It suggested to me that Pavlin couldn't be just the only cave where there is some form of artistic endeavour. And what you've got at the Red Lady, at Pavlin Cave is this burial, which was originally dated to 16,000 BC in 1964, and now it's got a date of 33,000. So for those of you who are being smart about radiocarbon dating, think on. You have to get more than one sample to make sure you're getting the right sample of the right dating.
Mhm.
Because there's obviously a 16,000 year difference between the one which was done by Oakley in 1964 and the stuff that's been done by the British Museum in the last few years. So it's getting quite interesting. And what they found there with the burial were these beautiful ornaments made from mammoth ivory. So it's artistic endeavor, but portable art. And I just thought to myself, well, it can't be the only cave along that 95, those 95 caves along the Gower coast that
Oh
doesn't
wow.
have.
Yeah.
So, and again, I now know of three or four potential caves that are now displaying potential Paleolithic wall art of some form, either engraved um, or painted. And so, moving much forward, I've discovered sort of two or three sites now. My son discovered one site in
Wow.
King Arthur's Cave in the Wye Valley. There's two other caves which are now have to remain secret for the moment, but there's some interesting stuff there. I've run it past Jean Plot, who's probably one of the most
Mm.
important and eminent specialists on cave art in the world, I would say. And he's concurred with me that we are looking at something quite spectacular in one particular cave, but that's awaiting more research and analysis. I've just got to get
Well,
the
I
funding
can't
for
wait to hear
that.
about it. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
so
it's
very
quite exciting.
exciting.
Yeah. And then we come to this cave in on the Gower coast, which I have been sort of again. It's one of those caves which you take students to. It's a difficult one to get down to, and again, if any of you are cavers, it's got a degree of difficulty for its approach. I would say of about three or four, uh, but then it gets worse because if you suffer from vertigo, just don't do it. So
Yeah.
it's quite a trek to get to this particular cave. And I can reveal the story. The story is very interesting. In fact, I would say some of the archaeological history of a lot of cave sites I look at, and I dare say you might think about this as well, Seth, is that sometimes the history of the archaeology is more interesting sometimes than the actual archaeology itself. Because we can all yawn, sorry, Flint people, we can all yawn when you see these beautiful flint pieces coming out of Paleolithic caves. But in many respects, the textbooks show us we've seen it all before. But I won't start a debate. So the one cave site I'm looking at now, this was actually a really interesting story because um, it had been uh, the Pavilion Cave had been looked at by a guy called William Solis. It was first looked at by a guy called William Buckland in 1823, but in 1912, a guy called William Solis, who was a geologist, went to the Pavilion Cave and actually sorted out the stratigraphy that William Buckland just actually threw out. So there was a little bit of stratigraphy left. He excavated and managed to get a really interesting sequence using the flint using the flint within the stratigraphy to try and work out what was going on. And you had a stratigraphy going from the Ordination right through to the Holocene, early Holocene, Mesolithic. And he met up with a guy called the Abbé Broyel. And again, for those of you who are into rock art, you know who I'm talking about. He was the so-called father of prehistory, a French priest who became really interested in prehistory. And he was sort of roaming Europe and the world at a time when really rock art verification was still in its infancy. So cast your mind back to Altamira and the owner of Altamira, who tried to show that these beautiful bulls, sleeping bulls we had in the ceiling at Altamira, were genuine, but they were considered fake by people like Katiak, for example. It wasn't until 1902 when Katiak had to write a letter of apology in anthropology to the owner or the owner's daughter of the cave to say he got it wrong,
Right.
which is reasonably noble of him. If you look at the wording of the letter, there's a little bit of resentment in there, but anyway, nonetheless. And so Broyle was sort of starting to look around the caves of Europe, looking at cave stratigraphy, looking at flint assemblages, and then verifying the sites. And he was also looking at rock art. Anyway, in 1912, he came to this particular cave and he met up with William Solis. They looked at Minchin Hole, which is another big cave site on the Gower coast. They looked at other caves as well. And then there's this cave, which I can't mention at the moment. They found a series of red streaks going horizontal on this one cave wall down in a side chamber. And they made an announcement. We found it, and it went into the New York Times, got into the Guardian. So it was a really an important international discovery. And lo and behold, by 1928, the cave had been the discovery had been dismissed by an inspector who went down there, inspector of ancient monuments, who went down there, couldn't see it because most of it at that time, well, nearly all of it, sorry, was covered by a stale flow. And as you
Right.
well know, there are different intensities and different opaqueness of style. This is a particularly thick style, and the thick style really covered most of the art. Although if you look hard enough, you just about see the red lines coming through. So it was dismissed by 1928. So I always called it when I was lecturing at Bristol, a false dawn. We were nearly there, going to find something, but then the Anglo-Spanish team at Creswell Crags found something in 2003. And that really sort of set the eyes wandering in these caves, see what see what you could find. And so I was down there last year with a colleague of mine, Barbara, and Barbara's got better eyesight than me. We were there September the 22nd, if I remember rightly, last year, and she said, "Oh look, I think we found the art," and we found the art. So April the 2nd, we went back to the cave. I managed to get funding from the National Trust, the owners of this particular cave site, and also funding from the Bradshaw Foundation. And we got the first art team from Spain and Portugal to come over, take the sampling to assess whether it was hematite or not. We have to do this, and also to assess if we had any recipe constituents or within the hematite mix. Because again, that would be interesting to see if we could have lipids and to see if there's anything like milk, urine, saliva, and that would open it up for DNA, for example. So, unfortunately, we didn't, but we know it was pure hematite mixed with water. And Alistair Pike came down and he took samples for uranium thorium dating, and we've now got a date of, if I remember rightly, 15,700 or thereabouts before present. So it's within that sort of that sequence, that sort of late glacial sequence, similar to Creswell Crags, but it's the first painted rock art we've got in northwestern Europe, and
Mhm.
it's also probably the earliest as well. I've got to check my records and check them with what I found in Cathol, and also what they've got at Creswell Crags. So it's quite exciting in one respect. Nowhere near as exciting, I suppose, as what we've got elsewhere in southern Europe. But again, that's that different type of Paleolithic and
Right, right.
that northern frontier attitude and mentality for producing art. We don't know what it is, but what's really exciting, Seth, is that either side of that particular painting is more painting, which we've sampled. We've sampled some of it, but not all of it. We haven't dated it. And then I've been using this thing called D-Stretch, which is my sort of one of my main tools in the toolbox for looking at rock art. And what I can do is I can isolate sometimes, if I'm lucky, the graffiti because it's a very heavily graffitied chamber where this stuff has been found. I can isolate the graffiti away from what's underneath it, and lo and behold, I think I've got stuff there as well. So it could be quite an interesting, well, not could be, it will be a very interesting discovery when we can advertise it to the world. And so watch this space on that particular one. So that's where I'm at the moment in terms of the of understanding the my Paleolithic in the British Isles. And of course, we don't have it in Norway, don't have it in Sweden, Denmark. Maybe we obviously have it in Germany and also in France, certainly south of the Loire Valley. It's all there, but it's all part of that sort of migratory spirit
Right,
that Paleolithic
right.
communities had
And
towards the end of the late glacial.
for those who are listening who might just quickly be thinking to themselves, well, why don't we have art from those areas? Well, that's because those areas were covered in ice at the time, you know,
Yeah,
ice
yeah,
age.
basically, yeah,
So we're
yeah,
talking, of course, as Dr. Nash said, the frontier of where literally humans are coming up against mile high sheets of ice. I mean,
absolutely.
they are parts of the landscape. They're not like what we see today. Oh, it's snowing. No, they're cliffs of ice that are what we're going up against. So
Yeah,
that's the time period we're speaking about right
yeah. When we're looking at what summer temperatures of, I would say between -10 and -15, maybe -20, especially when you look at the glacial maximum. And the glacial maximum came down no further than the northern part of the Gower Peninsula. So we're very fortunate in many respects. We've got these very early dates for the Red Lady of Haviland, for example, and we've got it probably in Cathol as well with the discovery by McBurney of those Font Romboy points. So again, it's really telling us that we look at a point in time with our minimum dating. I say minimum dating because we could have behind that stele paint or engravings which are much earlier. I can only give you a minimum date for this particular site of
now.
15,700 BP, but it's more than likely that we're looking at a date much earlier. Now, the one thing we have got there, which Alistair pointed out, was we've got a style flow underneath the art. So we get a
Mm,
minimum and a maximum date for the uranium thorium dating, whereby the art is actually the sandwich, the filling of the sandwich, so to
right.
speak. That'd be very exciting because if the style formed quite late on and the paint then goes on and then suddenly it styles over, then we could have, a very tight date, which would be lovely if we could do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
And sorry, just to go back to the context, the environmental context
right.
of this site. Remember, that sea level was about between 50 and 70 meters lower than it is today. Remember, all that water was locked up in the ice, the Fennoscandian in Eurasia and the Laurentide in North America. And so, there was a lot of land available. Uh,
Yes, there was a lot more
and there was
land.
no Bristol Channel. It was a plateau
Right.
of rich sedges, grass, mosses, lichens, and these were ideal plant foods for mammoth, bison, horse, reindeer, elk. So you're going to get all those megafauna in all the caves. Well, so far the caves that have been excavated, it's all coming up in these caves along the Gower Coast.
Right, which brings up a whole field of underwater archaeology that for another time. Um, Now, before we leave Europe and your work in Europe, I wanted to talk a little bit about Neanderthals because, who doesn't love Neanderthals? Are you, let me ask a simple question. So there's Team Neanderthal, yes, they made art, and there's Team No, we're still attributing it somehow to modern humans, whatever. What team do you sit upon currently based on the evidence?
Team Neanderthal.
There we go.
And we've now got the evidence for it. And again, I can't reveal the two sites,
Right.
but they're both on the Iberian Peninsula. We've been, for the last 12 months, on and off, I've been working with the First Art team, and the First Art team have been sampling. I mean, we've sampled a hell of a lot of caves, about 40 or 50 caves now, and we've been working with the Max Planck Institute, who have been doing the DNA analysis. And I can reveal, I can whisper in your ear, we have two sites. I can't say no more than that, which have
Right. Okay.
yielded potential Neanderthal, uh, Neanderthal, a direct, not an indirect, but a direct um, uh, uh, not dating, yeah, direct dating of DNA between the DNA residues and the art. We got that on two caves. But again, I can't say any more than that.
Right. Right.
I'd be strung up.
And just for someone wondering like how DNA would get there, going to like the very basics of how some rock art is created is like the spit technique, right? Where you
Yeah.
can you explain that briefly for people
Yes,
who
very,
don't
very
really know
simple.
anything?
It's not just spit technique. Although, I mean, last week I was in a couple of caves in Spain where we were sampling spit technique spreads, which is basically your mouth is full of pigment. And you go and you create either handprint or you just spit onto the wall itself, creating quite a nice sort of spread. Imagine trying to sneeze onto a
Yeah.
wall. That's the sort of thing you're doing. And so we've got that. We've also got again, I've got to be careful how I say it because
Right.
it's
Right. Right.
not public. It's not public knowledge at the moment. Um, but we've also got the idea of Neanderthal and early modern human using their fingertips. And I think they could be children.
Right.
They're basically smearing, usually two fingers, I think representing hoof marks, to be quite honest. But
Mm,
obviously the residues and the DNA, because may have done that, they
mm.
were picking up the residues on that as well, on that sort of
Wow, that is
technique. So
that is
it's very, very
intense.
exciting. I mean, it's stuff in terms of hard science, a little bit over my head, uh, but to see the Max Planck team at work, I mean they are typically of the Max Planck uh, sort of ethos. They are a machine. They really know how to
Right.
sort of go through and do the sampling. And same with our First Art team. We're there for different reasons. The First Art team are there to sample the pigments to see what the constituents are, see what the recipes are, and more importantly, to try and also to keep an eye out for any sort of style flow that flows over the the painting, so we get a date from them. And we've been very successful so far with a number of cave sites where we've been working. I suppose in one respect, and again, I'll say this: one cave site. Again, I can't reveal it. I thought Rising Star was a swine, a horrible so and so to try and crawl through. But there was one cave site I did 2 weeks ago, which wasn't a pleasure. And you sometimes wonder, why do modern humans and maybe Neanderthals, why do they
Yeah.
go into those caves to do that sort of thing? Well, I think it's just one word: sanctuary. There's a religious, symbolic sanctuary down there somewhere, which makes them want to do it. That's the most important thing about it.
Right. I mean, which looking at modern human cultures, we can see a lot of going deep down into the earth as sanctuary or as religious places, or in South America with the
Exactly.
underworld. It was a lot of um, what's the word? A lot of meaning has been given to going into the earth. So I definitely agree
I
with
think
your
yeah, I
thoughts
think you
there.
need to think about the idea of the modern church, or the modern synagogue or the modern mosque.
Hmm.
There are parts of the of those buildings which are very, very sacred, and more importantly, they are restricted for just certain people. The imam, uh, uh, the priest, for example, and they'll have an intimate knowledge between the maker, their God, and themselves, but they won't pass it on to anybody else because knowledge is power. And I think
Right.
this is quite important. It is quite important for the idea of when we're starting to think about how caves how their sacred space and their public space is divided up. And so that again, that's just a very important point to consider when you're looking at it.
And that I think is a great segue to Rising Star because just thinking about this cave system, I'm imagining certain areas could definitely have been more if we're going along the lines of Naledi did, use the space, etc. Certain areas definitely could have been more public, quote unquote, whereas other
Yeah.
areas are more private, specialized, as you're talking about. So let's start, from the top, I guess. What brought you to Rising Star,
Oh my goodness me.
aside from everyone knowing there's supposed Naledi rock art there?
Yeah. Well, I think a discussion like this can't go amiss without mentioning Genevieve, who you know. And Genevieve has been an absolute wonderful. She's a wonderful human being, and she's been really helpful with sort of organising. She hasn't actually been directly involved with Rising Star, but she's really set up the deal really. And I think Lee Berger, he's the guy who's been running Rising Star, along with the Wits University in South Africa in Johannesburg. And we got involved because of Genevieve. Genevieve obviously was speaking to Lee, and so she said, "Oh, I know a team who could come and help you out with that thing, with the artistic aspects of the project." And without being too offensive to Lee, I went there as a complete skeptic. I must admit, only because, well, first of all, it's steeped in controversy, as you will imagine, and what I've learned is that this is a very important lesson for me. Um, I don't believe in armchair archaeology. So I can make a criticism about a particular site, but until I've actually been there, looked at the context, looked at it with my own eyes, the stratigraphy, the layout of the cave, the access to the cave, I can't comment on it really. I really can't. And so I went there, and I think the First Art team, went there really with a very open mind about what we were going to be installed for, which is again very, very interesting when we got there. And we actually did three. I think the three entrances or three access points into the main Rising Star chamber, and we did all three of them. I cowardly pulled out of one, only because of age. I'm not very supple, and what it was called a twisty turny uh, um, maneuver, where you twist and turn and you go down 45 degrees. Called me Mr. Picky, just didn't fancy doing it. But then saying that, I did some more stupid things in the last couple of weeks in Spain and Portugal. So there we are. So next time I go there again, probably going to be there in January, hopefully, to do some sampling and to look at the dating as well, because there's one or two places where there's potential dating for rock art. So I went there as a skeptic, and for those of you who don't know about Naledi and Rising Star Cave, discovered, I think, around about 2014 by two speleologists. Again, they knew what they were doing. They're sports speleologists. They're braver than me. Went down the chute. They found human remains. And again, this is where I get a little bit annoyed, a little bit irritated by people who make comments about well, then they're not buried in a particular way. Well, the thing is, we got to get out of our mindset as anthropologists, paleoanthropologists, with using a 21st century mindset. We got to think naledi to see what is actually going on. And so, when you put all these parameters and these sort of halts, say, well, it can't be a burial because of this, this, and this. You're only thinking it because you're thinking through for an archaeological or an archaeologist 21st century mindset. And I think sometimes you need to take yourself out of that situation. The small brain thing still worries me because we're looking at a brain size which is 60% smaller than ours, but it's conceivable. If I sat here talking to you and we were talking as primatologists, it'd be a different story. We could accept the idea of tool making, etc., etc. Behavioral activity similar to ours. Yes, it happens. So I just think we need to take ourselves out of that sort of frozen sort of attitude we have when we're looking at this particular species, this new species that Lee has been promoting. So we went there about 3 months ago to South Africa, and we saw the laboratory where the laboratory is. There's six laboratories there which Lee's financing at the moment, and they're basically doing a lot of the sort of preparation work for exposing some of the fossil evidence that they've got there, and from other caves as well within that area. And it is a remarkable setup. And again, there's two wonderful guys there, Kyle and Dirk, who are basically speleologists. They know they're basically our eyes and ears and our helpers to get us through into these very, very difficult spaces. And as I said to you before, there are three entrances. And what was interesting was that Lee has said he's found a lot of potential art there. What we have to take into consideration is that the geology of the cave is an elephant skin dolomite. And elephant skin by dolomite, by the name of it, tells you you've got lines going that way, that way, that way, that way, and sometimes that way and that way. So you can create an animal quite easily. And I think this is where you've got to be a bit careful. And so Lee's pointed out one or two places where we've had to actually verify, we've had to do the verification process. And it made it pretty clear that we've got some very interesting stuff down there. Again, I can't reveal too much at the moment, but in addition to what Lee's found, we've found another eight or nine sites down there, which are going to be looked at, sampled, checked over. And what I am convinced about at the moment is that we potentially have naledi making his or her marks down there. Only because, again, I've taken myself out of the 21st century mindset rock art specialist and started to think about the idea of the marks that have been made, well, the marks I've seen there, which are certainly not natural. They're certainly not modern human. They could be animal, but we've got to verify that with an archaeozoologist, maybe to come down there and have a look with us. So there's all manner of things that are going to be sorted out, I think, on our next visit, and then Lee's got it under control on that front. We're going to be going into the naledi chamber, which is going to be the big one, and that's where it does get exciting, because we found within the Rising Star chamber one site which Lee identified, which has got style flow over it. So again, that's quite exciting. I think it's been reported in one of his papers. So there's no big news there, but we will be able to date that. That's quite exciting. And again, that will tell us whether we're dealing with modern humans or something completely different. And again, I would say to the skeptics, and again, I'll be honest with you, I was a skeptic when I went down there. By the time I'd squeezed through all those horrible crawls and very, very tight squeezes, and saw what I did see, and the way it's been excavated pretty well, in fact. I think it's quite exciting what is going to come out of there in the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm sure that Lee will be in control of what goes on there. Again, I went there a skeptic, but I've come out there quite enthusiastic about what I've seen. So it's very, very exciting. And I actually speak for the rest of the first art team. There were 4 of us down there. and we all came to the same conclusion that there is something going on down there. But again, we just need to get that scientific, hard science data out of there to prove it, yay or nay.
Right,
So
absolutely.
that, that's where we are at the moment with that. So
And yeah.
yeah,
So just, sorry. So with, everything going on with the Rising Star team and you looking into everything, first of all, I'm very happy to hear that teams such as yours are being involved in looking at the rock art instead of, because I know when we first announced the preprints and everything, a lot of people said, well, no one has actually looked at the art yet. And it's good to hear that people, for those who are listening, people are looking at the art, and we'll have to see what the results are. But it is being method up. What's the word? Method. Used being,
mythological,
yes, it is being methodologically
methodological.
looked at. It is being looked at in a methodological way, and we're going to have some actual results, maybe even some dates on
Yeah.
what some of this stuff is in the next few years. So,
Uh,
what is next for you then, sir? You
Well,
are busy. You are all over the place.
I will say, I'll just go back to Rising Star. What's very, very interesting is, Seth, is that I won't call it art. I'll keep. I'll call it markings. And what we see in Rising Star is what we see in nearly every cave that has Paleolithic art in it. There are always these little indicators from the entrance right through to where the art is, of little markers about how people should process or get into that particular passage, and how
Wow.
they're guided through that passage from one mark to another. And this is what we're finding, what we're seeing. I mean, again, I can't say too much, but the guy who's leading the first art team, Hipólito Collado, his eyesight is absolutely amazingly spectacular, but not better than mine. And he was seeing things quite clearly when he points them out to me, that we've got something here, and it's again this idea about how you move or how you access a particular point from the entrance to where you want to go. And again, I just refer your viewers to a place like Ruffignac, for example, where you have from the entrance to where the rock art is a 2 kilometer hike. So you'd have to crawl through that cave 2 kilometers. Now you could either go that way, or that way. But if you take the wrong turning, you're screwed. So in many respects, you've got to have these markers in order to guide you through a cave system. And Rising Star is, I think if I remember rightly, it's about 5 kilometers. The whole cave system is 5 kilometers. So there's a lot of things going on there. And I will again hasten to add, I've seen evidence of certainly Iron Age there in one of the entrances, and also potential early modern human. I think that's my view for what it's worth.
So,
But it doesn't detract from the idea that you also have the naledi down there as well.
you at least are comfortable saying and going, because Dr. Berger is very big on promoting the idea that no one else was in the cave before the cavers. And I know personally from talking to the two speleologists you mentioned that they had found re- evidence of previous cavers in there. So you're saying there's
Yeah,
signs
yeah.
of Iron Age possibly, and I mean,
We
there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on there. And the thing what you have to take into consideration is that, remember that the gold industry in the 19th century and early part of the 20th century were mining calcite because they wanted to make the gold more pure. And calcite was an excellent sort of ingredient to purify the gold. And so a lot of the entrances, well, at least two of the entrances that I've been into have been heavily hacked around with. But we know just inside one entrance, there is a very, very nice Iron Age site. We found it. We looked at it. There's rock art down there as well. So again, we were called in by Lee just to look at, or to make a preliminary um, report on what we have found, what we could see. We've done that. We've tested out the theories on the elephant skin dolomite. So we've got a blueprint, a control point, a control
Hmm.
on what not to look for. And so when we're down there again, hopefully in January, late January, that we will be looking at we'd be able to test out those theories on some of the stuff that Lee's found, and also more importantly, to also test the stuff that we've actually found as well. Um, Obviously, we looked at it completely different eyes to Lee because we're specialists. It's our job to look at rock art. And
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, we've done a damn good job down there. The report has been accepted. He was very happy with it, and if he's happy, I'm happy.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, besides bouncing around all these sites, you first of all, I think I failed to mention you are a well-written author. You have multiple books out. You have many papers out. Are you working on any books at the moment or have
I'm
plans
afraid
for
so.
any in the future? I'm afraid so.
Yeah, it's a bug I can't seem to get rid of. Unfortunately, I've just had Sarah, who's one of my colleagues, Sarah Guthiers, one of my colleagues where I teach in Portugal. We've just produced a book out actually about 2 or 3 months ago called the Prehistoric Rock Art of Portugal. Surprise, surprise. That was published by Routledge, and I'm just about putting together a book. And again, it might bore some of um, your audience, but I'm just bringing out a book on the Neolithic of Wales. So the Neolithic uh, um, dolmen sites. So I said to you before is that sometimes the archaeological history is as important as sometimes the archaeology itself.
Right.
And what I'm really interested in is looking at the antiquarian history of how these sites were discovered, how they got destroyed. A lot of them were destroyed for building or whatever, and it's just tracing back where these sites were. So that's the book after I've published this one on the Welsh dolmens. And then I'm doing another book on Welsh rock art, which I've started to put together, and that hopefully be about towards the end of 2024, early 2025. So yeah, I'm pretty busy at the moment.
That's definitely for sure. And I'm just so looking forward to the work that you and the team, of course, are putting up. But you on your own and then other teams that you're working with, aside from the First Art team, is just spectacular. And I can't wait to see what comes next, what discoveries you yourself make. But even like you said, the stories that follow these discoveries are just so enthralling that maybe in a little bit we'll have you back on the show and have to talk about these new things that you found. Um, and once I think you have more information on Rising Star, I think it might be fun to have you and Genevieve and anyone else you might think would be interesting, and we all get together on here and have a little discussion once things are, okay to talk about.
Yeah,
And
sure. Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
I
don't know
think
if I've
that'd be,
I don't know if I've overstepped the mark already, but it's stuff which is already in the public domain anyway.
yeah,
But
if it's public, it's public, but
yeah,
you haven't said anything that I haven't said either. So,
lovely.
so
That's good
we're
news.
we're good
I'm not in trouble then.
there. But I think this has been a wonderful episode with you, Dr. George Nash, and I think our guests and our viewers will have enjoyed learning from you. And, is there any parting words that you'd like to say to either future students or people who want to follow in your footsteps? Any advice you'd like to give or closing remarks?
What I would say, and this is, I would never have said this 20 years ago, look in your backyard. Because what I've learned is that I always thought that the British Isles during the Paleolithic, the Upper Paleolithic, was a barren landscape with very little going on. And I was put off, I was put off, I was turned on by that by looking at a guy called J.J. Wymo, who's now passed away, but he did a book in 1977 where he listed all the Mesolithic sites and Paleolithic sites in the British Isles. And about 4 pages of that book, of about 500-page book, were dedicated to Paleolithic. And you think, well, it's just a few bits of flint, isn't it? But quite clearly it's not. It's a very, very complex landscape we're dealing with. And the more I delve into it, and the more I start to look, and the more I start to read and learn from other people. That is again another interesting point is read, and because there's
Yes.
stuff there. In particular, some of the antiquarian and the early archaeological opinions on the Paleolithic, in particular the British Isles or even North America, because they have a lot to say. And they had a lot to say without the science, the hard science we have today. And let's face it, they weren't too far off.
It is astonishing how accurate some of these earlier ideas have come out to be, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. And with that, everyone, I think we will bring this episode to a close. Make sure you like, subscribe for more because we will always have more episodes of the story of us. And I want everyone to say a wonderful and nice farewell, Dr. George Nash, and we will see you next time.